Hello, welcome to nomination into the general election all the way to the election winner. So I'm going to cover this pretty quickly. A number of the things such as electoral college, winner-take-all voting, all that we'll go over in class. We will discuss at length because it's important stuff and I don't want to just reduce it to about 30 seconds on a video. So hopefully you get something out of this. As always, ask questions as they arise. So here's the primary season. You can see here a number of people were entered into the Democratic primaries this year. As you move along throughout the primary season, people realize, hey, we don't have any more money. We're not getting the support we thought we might get. It's not working out for us, and they drop out. And that slowly becomes, goes down to one. But again, it starts with a number of people, as you can see on this slide. So presidential primary, as we talked about, what is it? It is the election. It's basically the election, whether it's either through the caucuses or through the primary, either closed or open primaries. So they choose some or all of the state party organizations delegates to the national convention. You do express a preference among these various contenders in the president's party's presidential nomination. It is a knockdown, drag out selection process for the party out of power. By that I mean, in this current election, in the election of 2020, it's the Democrats. Republicans have not. It's pretty stable. They are supporting their president. He had really, for the most part, zero challenges in the primary season because he's the incumbent. So he doesn't have to really recover from much at all, whereas the Democrats have to recover from this knockdown, drag out fight that they've had amongst one another over the last several months. Again, the caucuses, as we talked about, this is held in states that do not hold a presidential primary. There's delegates to the national conventions are selected. They go of these local caucuses and district and or state conventions. This is the closed meeting where you go into the small, either gymnasium or library, meeting room or wherever it is, and you select your delegates to the national convention. You're doing that with that person or the candidate's name, and that's how you're choosing it. There is an individual that goes and represents that person, and that's not very important because it doesn't matter who that is. We elect them here in Indiana, but in the caucus system, it's similar to electing them, but it is a person that goes and represents. These have declined in popularity, the caucuses have. Iowa still is the first one, as mentioned last time. So how's it go? Where does it start? We talked about this a little bit, that Iowa holds the first caucus, New Hampshire holds the first primary, and they've done that. It's tradition. Why? Tradition, and essentially they've given that to them, and it's a huge money-making opportunity for Iowa and New Hampshire because the candidates will spend a lot of time in both of these places. When they're first feeling this out, they're putting out those feelers about whether or not they should run. Iowa is a place where they spend some time. They go to the county fair and see how their numbers look, and they go and they do some photo ops. They want to see what it looks like. The whole season goes from January to May. In a quarantine year, it was a bit different, but it's January to May. Indiana's primary is in May, which is really late, comparatively speaking. And there's criticisms to this. There's a lot of problems with this whole system. Is you consider it to be front-loading versus not front-loading. Front-loading, it means it's more important. You have a lot more candidates to choose from. Iowa and New Hampshire have a lot more people they get to choose from. So why is that? What's good about that? What's bad about it? Good about it is they get to focus on those small states. So the candidates themselves don't have to be trying to cross the country backwards and forwards, getting their name out there in a primary. Criticisms of it, people think that we should move it a little closer to the beginning of the year, that it should be done quicker so that at least our vote matters. Because in Indiana, let's face it, by May, oftentimes the candidates are already chosen. And it doesn't mean a whole lot at that point. So you take these states out of the equation. So people, they think, let's move it forward in the season, and if we can be more forward, we're going to have a chance to participate. Solution, things like Super Tuesday. This is where they call it the SEC primary down in the South because they go within Super Tuesday in March, and it's one day where a number of states vote on the same day, and that's for the primary. That way, if you win and you survive Super Tuesday, your campaign is doing very well and you have enough money. That is where a lot of people are going to withdraw because, again, that's where the money and the popularity comes in. You know it by then if you have a real shot or not. So Super Tuesday is a big deal. Their vote still counts. Those primaries are still really important. Whereas, again, in Indiana in May, oftentimes it's chosen or it's down to two candidates. We don't get to pick from amongst the whole bit. So after that's done, then you're going to go to the national convention. These party conventions have three major goals, and we're going to do something with these in class. But naming the party's presidential and vice presidential candidates. Oftentimes, we already know this. This is already written on the wall. We already know who these people are, but we're going to name them, formally do it. We're going to try to bring those various factions of leading personalities into the party together in one place for a common purpose, a uniting, if you will. When you think back to the 2016 election and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, the DNC, which is the Democratic National Committee, did a terrible job trying to unite these factions. You had a number of Bernie supporters that felt like they were, spurred, that they didn't get the recognition, that Bernie deserved more recognition for things he had done, that the super delegates, and again, something we'll talk about, went to Hillary without the people's voice, and people were understandably very upset by that. And the DNC didn't do much to really help their situation. So they had a terrible time uniting those factions, so much so that in the stadium or the arena where they were doing this, Bernie supporters were actually turning their back when Hillary was speaking. Not a symbol, not something you want to send if you're the party trying to win an election. And then the third thing they're going to do is adopt the party platform. What is it that we're going to work on? If I win your nomination, I've won your nomination. If I win the presidency, here is what I want to work on moving forward. This can be anything, and Trump campaigned heavily on the border wall. Others will do health care or tax reform, something like that. That's their platform. It's what they want to do. Interesting thing about these, the Constitution never says a single thing about the presidential nominations. State and federal statutes are silent as well. This nomination process is completely a byproduct of what the parties have done. They put themselves on the map. They've made themselves relevant by doing this, and they're going to hold on to that power. Here is the map of your presidential primaries and caucuses. This is 2016. As you can see, May is really the end of it because by then it's pretty much over. There are still some in June, and then obviously in a pandemic year, things got shifted backwards quite a bit. But as you can see, those early states are where you find yourself really important. January, February, and March, you're going to have a lot more candidates to choose from, particularly in a presidential primary. So where do you go? So you won the nomination, and in the primary, what you're doing is you're battling candidates from your party. So the Democrats, as the first sign, you saw those yard signs, it was Andrew Yang and Elizabeth Warren and Biden and Bernie and all those people. What are they doing? They're fighting for the base of the party. They're fighting for those votes of party members, people that are going to vote in that primary. So they tend to be either pretty far to the left in the Democratic instance or pretty far to the right in the Republican Party when there's a primary there. So they're catering to the base of the party at that point. After that's over, after you've won your nomination, it's a race to get back to the middle to see who can be considered more center, because most Americans view themselves as centrists, that they might lean one way or the other, but most Americans will say, I'm more of an independent or I'm a centrist type of voter. So the general election is all about trying to capture those middle of the road voters. You're going to win the fringes of your party. Presumably you're going to win those. So you got to get back to the center to capture those undecided voters. Presidential campaign. This is going to be your all-out effort to win votes of the American people. You got to target these swing states. It's called a winner-take-all election. If you win 50% plus one of the votes in Indiana, you capture all of Indiana's electoral votes. So you have to focus on these swing states. You got to know where to go to raise money, but also where that money should be spent. And you're going to spend these in places like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, New Mexico. Those are going to be your toss-up. Wisconsin, all going to be your toss-up states that are really, really important. So you got to get the swing voters in those states. Those battleground states are where they're going to spend most of their time. That's where their campaigning is. When people talk about abolishing the Electoral College, this is one concern, is that the candidates will then spend a lot more time campaigning in every state, whereas now they go to these swing states and a lot of the country only has to pay attention to it on TV or the radio because they're not in your state. They're not actually disrupting anything in your state. So battleground states are really important. All of this is a large buildup, and the amount of money we'll talk about, and we will talk about in class, is incredible, but we'll reach $1 billion in this election cycle here. So This all ends on election day when the voters cast their votes. This is going to be done. President is not going to be formally elected, however, until the presidential electors meet in D.C. For the Electoral College to cast their votes. So you go a few vocab terms here. Again, we'll go over this in voting and elections. But a polling place, precinct is where you're going to go. That's the smallest unit for every election. On election day, it's the Tuesday following the first Monday in November, and we will watch a kind of humorous clip about why we do this. Most states will also hold their own elections too. The governor is often up. Mayoral candidates can be in this. And you'll also have, obviously, your House of Representatives candidates listed. And if you're one of those Senate seats that are up, you'll have your senator there too. Political efficacy is whether or not you're going to vote. This is the strong determinant if you're going to show up at the polls. If you have a high level of political efficacy, it means that you believe your vote counts, that your vote is important. Low levels mean that you don't think that you play much of a role. Absentee voting we'll talk about. It's a big issue this election. And then changes. We've had an increase in split ticket voting in recent years. Why is that? Well, it's part of the divided government. We have no problem now, whereas a long time ago people wouldn't necessarily have done this. We have no problem voting for a Republican president and a Democratic senator, or vice versa. So that is going to lead to divided government. What's the problem with the winner take all? We're going to talk a lot more about this, but this is a contest, as I mentioned. If you win 50% plus one of your votes, plus one of the votes, you are going to win those electoral college votes. If you win the popular vote, you win all the electoral college votes. In Indiana, you could win by 6 total votes, but you're going to get all 11 electoral votes. And we will talk about this and watch a clip. Minority parties don't figure in very often. They just don't win it very often due to this. 2 major parties, these single member districts for your House races, all of this winner take all system really does eliminate really the viability of third parties being a major player in American government. Casting your ballots, you'll either do this in person, most of us will. You can do by mail, maybe, depending on what Indiana comes up with. And sometimes it'll be done electronically where you will walk in with a computer screen and you'll hit some buttons and go through. They call these bedsheet ballots because you will vote on a number of things. Sometimes you'll vote on a state constitutional amendment. Other times you'll vote on a number of candidates for school board or surveyor or coroner and those sorts of things. People generally, as you go down the ballot, lose interest. They lose interest in this. So it's called ballot fatigue, and you might not fill out all the rest of the ballot because people get tired of it. Coattails, again, something that's very common. If someone above you on the ballot, a presidential candidate, senator, somebody like that is running really well, you want to ride their coattails. You want to go and ride those coattails and see, because you want to associate yourself with them, and that makes it you're more likely to win. Some people say there's a problem with the frequency of elections. I don't see it. It seems to happen a lot more in other countries, but people do complain that we have too many between the primary and the general elections, that it's just too often. This is your 2012 versus your 2016 electoral map. You can see where Trump really picked up a number of states that Obama had won. Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin were key. Florida certainly very key, where that really turned the tide and really propelled Trump to a victory. The Electoral College, again, we're going to talk a lot about this. I'm just going to leave this. I'm not going to spend time on it here, but know that your candidate, you need 270 of the electoral votes to win. If you don't win, that election goes to the House of Representatives. Again, another thing that we will talk about. I did cross out here, electors are expected to use their own judgment in selecting presidency. That's when they go to the Electoral College. Not any longer. The Supreme Court ruled on that recently, and we will read an article about that in class. Campaign spending, big issue. It's a big issue. There's small contributors, the grassroots campaigning, which a number of candidates pride themselves on, but you have these wealthy individuals, the candidate themselves, you have PACs and super PACs. All of these are spent. All this money is going to be spent, and it is an incredible amount of money for particularly presidential races. Even a school board race in some major cities is costing candidates about $1 million. Hard money is money that's given directly to the candidate. Soft money is that is given to political organizations or PACs. That is usually unlimited. Again, we will talk more about this in class. Again, hard money, soft money, and then we'll see some charts on 2012 spending versus 2016 spending and where that money is coming from. It's pretty interesting to see because special interest is playing a large role in American politics, and we're going to talk about whether or not they should or should not. Buckley versus Valeo was a Supreme Court case that struck down electoral campaigns, basically, and Citizens United versus the FEC, another case that we will look at in detail. If you have any questions, let me know.